Well, hello again, everybody. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. Awkward to Awesome, How Leaders Boost Diversity, Collaboration, and Innovation with Cultural Intelligence. My name's Jeff Murphy. I'm a member of the Alumni Career Engagement Team here in the Office of Alumni Relations at Boston University. Today's event is offered to our 385,000 alumni around the globe, and of course, all of our current students. We appreciate everyone who has joined us today, some of you tuning in from some very far away places from our Boston campuses. Throughout your career, BU is committed to helping you define and achieve your professional goals. And we aim to do this by providing everybody with access to a series of valuable programs, tools, and communities. In addition to this webinar series that you're participating in, one of our most exciting resources is a free online community called BU Connects. If you haven't already signed up, I hope you'll take 5 minutes after this presentation to log in and set up your profile at buconnects.com. We currently have over 26,000 BU alumni and students already on the platform. It's the very best place to build your professional network with other terriers, join regional and special interest groups, become a mentor, find a mentor, or both. I hope you'll check it out again at buconnects.com. Before I introduce today's speaker, a couple of housekeeping notes. Today's presentation is being recorded and will soon be made available for on-demand viewing on the BU Alumni and Friends website, which you can find at www.bu.edu/alumni. Our speaker today is very eager to very eager to engage with all of you. And to that end, we're going to be asking some short answer questions along the way that we're going to ask you to answer those questions in the chat. We're also going to save the last 15 minutes of our time together for your questions, but we're actually going to ask you to go ahead and just jot them down as you think of them, maybe on a piece of paper in front of you, and hang on to those until we get to that Q&A portion. And then at that time, we will ask you to go ahead and put them either in the chat or on Zoom. You'll also see there's a Q&A box where you can go ahead and submit your question. And we're going to hope to have time at the end to get through all of those. And of course, if we don't, I already know Dr. Amy is very happy to follow up with folks individually after. So speaking of Dr. Amy, now it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker for the day, career and leadership coach, consultant, speaker, and Wheelock College of Education and Human Development alum, Dr. Amy Narishkin. With a PhD in adult education and 30 years of experience, Dr. Amy is a consultant, strategist, and executive coach, helping humans and organizations make the shift to cultural intelligence. Dr. Amy works with CEOs, management teams, and those who take the lead in organizations to effectively implement the tools for cultural intelligence, collaboration, and innovation for growth. Dr. Amy is also a certified administrator for the Intercultural Development Inventory at the IDI. As a cross-cultural thought leader and successful entrepreneur, she coaches both individuals and organizational teams to create exciting, culturally intelligent places to work and interact. To jumpstart your cultural intelligence so you can feel free to talk and work with just about anyone, contact Dr. Amy. Read her latest blog at empoweringpartners.com. Dr. Amy, thank you so much for being here today. And we actually have rescheduled this. I'm so glad we're finally able to do it together. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my slides, and you've got a deck to share with everybody. If you want to go ahead and get those up and running, we'll be well on our way.
Give me a thumbs up, Jeff, when you can see the slides, please.
I can see them, but yeah, there you go. Perfect.
There we go. Thank
Yep.
you.
Perfect.
Thank you for the lovely introduction. And what I just learned from Jeff is people are tuning in from around the world. So if you're here on the Central Time Zone or before, I'm Amy Narishkin. I'm in St. Louis, Missouri, and good morning to you. If you are on the East Coast with Jeff and beyond, good afternoon to you. And for those of you who are closer to bedtime, good evening. And thank you for joining us. I appreciate it. Oh, forever the teacher, because I'm a Wheelock grad, right? I've got to give you an agenda. I want you to know what's happening. We're going to start with a contemplative moment. And that may seem strange to start a workshop with a contemplative moment, but I promise it'll make sense. And I know that people who show up for the kind of workshop that I teach do more before 10 a.m. than most people do all day long. So it's probably going to be okay if you just have a moment to breathe. Then I'm going to ask you a warm-up question. And for my attendees, my participants who are introverted or neuroatypical or who just need a moment to think, the warm-up question is, what makes it hard to talk with people that seem different? So I'll give you an opportunity to answer that question in the chat box in just a minute. We're going to develop some common vocabulary, and I'm going to share a story with you to illustrate how that vocabulary comes into being for me. We're going to determine the value of diversity. We're not going to make any assumptions that diversity has value. We'll show you. We're going to discover what keeps us from connecting with people who seem different. Learn 3 tools for connecting. I'll ask you a wrap-up question, and I'll let you know where we go from here. So here's the contemplative moment for very busy, big-hearted people like you. So if you could sit up in your chair, or maybe you're standing, just kind of sit up straight and get comfortable. And the first thing I want you to do is, if you're comfortable, gently close your eyes and feel your feet. When you feel your feet, it grounds you. And particularly when you're talking with someone who's different, it can be a little unsettling. So feeling your feet gets you grounded. And then if it's appropriate and you'd like to now, you can put your hand over your heart and feel your heart space. It's a beautiful way to get back in touch with you, because with cultural intelligence, it starts with you. Take 3 deep breaths in your time, then I'll invite you back. Oh. Breathe out slowly and join me in chat, please. I'll be asking you these kind of open-ended but short answer questions that you can answer in a word or two. What makes it hard to talk with people who are different? Jeff, feel free to jump in the chat or say it out loud. What makes it hard to talk with people who are different?
I did put this in the chat. I'm somebody who can't talk and type at the same time, but I know for me, I'm always afraid that I might offend somebody, more likely afraid that I might embarrass myself.
Amen. I feel you.
Well, Julia's afraid of offending. Vanessa's fear of offending. All right, we're all
Yeah.
on the same page about that.
Yeah.
Renee, will I say something inappropriate?
It's a really good point.
Sarah, not being certain how to find common ground.
Yeah, Sarah, you're spot on.
Swati, worried about conflict or disagreement.
Yeah, we don't want to get into an argument or discussion, misunderstanding with somebody. Spot on.
And I'll just use this opportunity to remind folks, I know Dr. Amy really wants us to be interactive. So as we continue to go along, please do chime in on the chat when we ask. And Helen says she doesn't feel afraid, but maybe that's her problem. That's an interesting
No,
point.
it's not a problem. That's wonderful that you've got a heart to talk with people who are different. And maybe we call that unique. It's wonderful, Helen. There isn't a wrong or right way to be when we're talking with people that are different or in new situations. How you feel is just perfect. So often when I ask this question, these are the answers that I get that are very much in line with what you're saying. It feels awkward, and you may say the wrong thing and you don't know what to say, and you don't want to upset the person. And all that's legit. And they're really good reasons. And so you can imagine if one person feels awkward, the impact on an organization. And this is what happens when you've got a whole bunch of awkward going on in an organization. Colleagues and clients feel excluded. Conversations can be stifled. There can be fighting between groups and departments, and diverse talent may not want to stick around. New markets are suppressed, and engagement and innovation can be low, and there can be tardiness, and high turnover. So often when organizations hire me, they're dealing with attrition and they're just kind of scratching their heads. Why are people leaving? So anytime we're talking about a cross-cultural initiative, talking with people who have different perspectives, whether that's because of nationality or skin color, or because of gender or generation or religion or orientation, we have to start with developing a common vocabulary. So I've used the word cultural intelligence, and I'm just going to break that down. We're going to start with intelligence. And very simply, when I'm talking about intelligence, I'm just talking about knowing. Intelligence, in my case, is a knowing. And you know that there's intellectual intelligence up in our head. There's emotional intelligence with your heart, which is why you put your hand over your heart. There's gut intelligence. You can put your hand over your gut to feel that. And then there's cultural intelligence. And you actually need all three of those centers of knowing, your head, your heart, and your gut, to express cultural intelligence. Let's get this defined. Cultural intelligence is knowing. It's what enables a person to talk with a person who has a different perspective, because we accept them and their context as valid. And then we can adapt our words to show genuine respect, what's meaningful for them. So you don't have to remember that definition. We'll come back to it. I just wanted to give a sense of what we're working with. So let's break down cultural intelligence. I'm using the word culture. So this is a chat box time. When you hear the word culture, what comes to mind?
And for
Jeff
me,
says,
it's just made me think of things that bring people together,
yeah,
right? And I know, that can be a lot of different things, but something that gives people a sense of unity.
hmm? Unity and disunity.
Yeah. Yeah. And Swati mentions community traditions and commonalities. Tradition's a good point.
So maybe,
Renee, differences, difference.
yep,
Vanessa, traditions and history.
yep, spot on.
Claudia, sense of being. Stephanie, geographical connection. I know, Dr. Amy, you were saying that you thought that people might bring up food. That certainly is a cultural uniter.
Yes, it
Maybe not
is.
for my Irish family, but
Absolutely. So you can see
the
that
geographical connection.
there's a number of different words here, and they're all right. Culture includes all of that. Julia says it's different backgrounds, nationalities working together for a common goal. This is the definition I'm working with that suggests that you're all right. It's a set of attitudes, values, goals, and behaviors that a group of people have in common. And just so you know, Jeff, anytime I've done this workshop, never before has somebody talked about some people having common. And
Hmm.
you and a couple of other people have used that word common. And you're right. Is it Yulia? I'm hoping I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Upbringing, how you're brought up in a culture, and you are trained in those attitudes and values, and that culture is happening in your home and in your place of worship and in your school, your community center. And there's two kinds of culture that I'm working with here: visible and invisible culture. And because I'm forever an educator, I've got to give you a graphic here. There's the visible culture, the language, the rituals, the food that Jeff mentioned, the institutions, the laws, all the stuff that you can see. Just so you know, brains tend to love visible culture. And that would be why we go to Little Italy in New York City or Chinatown in San Francisco. We like visible culture. We like ethnicity that we can see and kind of wrap our minds around. Then there's invisible culture. We don't love, brains don't love invisible culture. And I guess it's because it's below the surface. We can't see it, the norms, the values, the beliefs, and the assumptions. In fact, brains don't like it so much that if there's a misunderstanding at that Thanksgiving table, here in the United States, when generations are getting together, most intercultural misunderstanding happens because of this invisible culture. There's another aspect of culture that I want you to know, is that every culture has has a dominant culture. It's the group that's the most powerful, widespread, or influential. And there's a non-dominant group, and there's non-dominant groups, excuse me. And the groups are distinct, but they coexist with, but they're subordinate to the dominant group. So for example, in a place of worship, the rabbi or the priest, for example, would set in motion the dominant culture. And then parishioners or members of that community might have subgroups, which would be committees that are part of the non-dominant group. Or in a school, the principal puts in motion the dominant culture, and then each classroom has a non-dominant culture that coexists, but it's subordinate. And this would be true in a home. I know Jeff has little ones, and he and his wife set in motion the dominant culture, and I'm sure his 3 and 6-year-old have some non-dominant stuff going on below the radar, right? It's happening in homes, in communities, in neighborhoods, in cities, in countries around the world. There are dominant cultures and non-dominant groups that are subordinate. And it can be because of any of these reasons: race, nationality, gender, generation, orientation, education, appearance. And then another word that's kind of a buzzword in society, particularly in the United States, is what's diversity and what makes it important? And very simply, diversity, it's again, visible and invisible. And organizations tend to diversify visibly, perhaps because of better photo ops, but organizations, you want all of this diversity. And I just need to say it, probably not for this group who's shown up, but I need to say it for the sake of just diversity. How we identify, how we look affects our ability to reach our potential and our emotional well-being, our health, and our safety, our ability to navigate financial, legal, and educational systems. And I'd like to give you an example based on some research. For example, here in the United States, employees of color not only encounter more negative incidents than their white counterparts, they also miss out on experiences that leave them feeling good. For example, going out for coffee, meeting for breakfast, career mapping, setting goals, those kinds of things that make you feel seen and valued in an organization aren't always happening quite as much for employees of color. And so there aren't just fewer reasons to stay, right? There are more reasons to leave. And that gap in positive experiences accounts for 10 to 15% difference in attrition for employees of color and whites. So that means retention, which so many people are concerned about right now, is not just about avoiding negative experiences, but also about having positive experiences. It's a very different conversation to be having in your organization. So with that example, I'd like to share a story with you that just kind of ground the work that I'm doing. Jeff, is it okay before I share my story? Is it too much to share some stats?
Oh, I don't think stats are, no, not at all. This is
Okay.
your time. You should share whatever you feel like is going to be most useful.
Okay. All right. So some stats that might be interesting to you here in the United States, just with regard to demographics. The average white person knows one Black person, and the average Black person knows 8 white people. And that's partly because of demographics. We're 52% white in the United States and about 13% Black. And 50% of the African Americans that live in the United States actually live in the Southeast, down by Georgia and Alabama. And that's where most Black folks live. So partly it's demographics, but the other thing is, I mentioned brains before. Brains don't seek out newness, typically. Now, Helen might be unique in that way, and I've come to seek out differences, but brains typically don't seek out differences because it is awkward, it's hard, and it can be uncomfortable. Nobody's fault. It's just the way this brain is wired, which is why we need more than just our head when we're talking with people who are different or seem different to us. We need our head and our heart and our gut. And that's certainly what I needed in the situation that I'll describe. So this was a hot summer day in late August. I attend a Black church up in the north part of St. Louis City. And it's about a 30-minute commute. I go there because Pastor and I did the doctoral program at the University of Missouri, St. Louis together. We got to know one another, and I just loved his spirit, and his church is just fully embraced me. And I definitely feel like the mini marshmallow in the bowl of hot chocolate. It can be kind of funny being the only white family in the church. And we definitely bump into awkward. And early on in my experience there, on this late, hot August day, the church was doing the Word of Life school supply giveaway event. Now, school actually had been in session for about 3 days. I'm not sure why we were 3 days after the fact, but people in the community, this is a tough part of St. Louis, just were so ready, just so appreciative of the school supplies. And but at 10 o'clock in the morning, I got there, and the event wasn't supposed to start till 11. And my husband, Cyril, I'm married to a French guy, a foreign-born national. So he just embraces differences. And he and I arrived at this event. Now, when I say event, I want you to imagine not a big, massive fair. This is a parking lot, a crumbling parking lot that we weed whacked, right? And it's part of and next to a shuttered brick school building. And it was across the street from our little church, and we'd gotten permission to use the parking lot. So when we arrived, the church members were setting up tents and tables and chairs and grills. And I'm gregarious, but I'm somewhat introverted. And I walked into this situation like, whoa, where do I belong? And Cyril, of course, highly extroverted, off the charts extroverted, just jumps right in with helping. Me, I stood there in the middle of all this hustle and bustle of this parking lot, and all these people just greeting each other, and just wondered, what can I, as a white woman, possibly have to offer this all Black community? And that's where the contemplative moment really came in handy. I just stood there. I've gotten used to just being for a moment with myself. And in that quiet, it occurred to me, whatever I do, I just need to sit down and not stand over people. And I thought, okay, because in that case, I'm identifying with the dominant culture as a white person, right? Not always, because I'm a woman, so I'm in an all-male room. It's a different story, but in this case, I was identifying with the dominant culture, so I didn't want to communicate I'm more powerful. And it just occurred to me to sit, but I didn't know where. Looked around, and over by what we had called the entrance was my very best friend at church, Jonathan. And he shares their skin colors, and he was over there slapping backs and shaking hands, just greeting people with such energy. And since he and I often spar and chat it up, it felt very natural to go sit at the table that was right by him. And at that table, moms would come in and they'd sit down and fill out the questionnaire, and their kids would just be standing there. And what was really fun about sitting was, now remember, I went to Wheelock, so I'm an educator, right? I'm at kid eye level. And it's like, oh, this is so fun, right? Because little ones who are like 3 or 4, I'm looking at them, right? Eyeball to eyeball. And I'd ask them about school, and, we would just giggle, and they would tell me about how it was happening and how much they loved their teacher. And then the teenagers would come in, and they'd just chat me up, and they'd tell me how tough the system is and how much they don't like it, or how much they love it. And I got to give them tips about how to kind of work the system and figure out, what they love can turn into a career. And while I was sitting there, I got more and more relaxed and thought, wow, I can do this. Well, I'd heard as an educator that a lot of times, or often, inner city kids don't start school on time. And I never knew why. I just knew that fact. And I asked this gal who was standing there, this little girl, I said, so how's school going? School's been in session for 3 days. And her mom looked up from the table and her questionnaire, and she said to me, she hasn't started yet. And so, of course, all that judgment comes flying in. And I just decided I was going to park that judgment at the gate and just be a little bit more open and curious. And I said, "Hey, what's going on?" And she said, "I lost my job as a nurse and I don't have the money to buy a uniform." And I took a deep breath and I said, "I get it. I'd want my kid looking good and right for school." And she said, "Yeah, thanks." And Jonathan overheard us and said, "I got a friend who's a nurse. Maybe she can hook you up." And I got to say, you know, folks across the street in church, they can help you get a uniform. And this woman, this mom just visibly relaxed and was like, "Oh, okay. I get it. I get it." I just I was starting to kind of wrap my mind around my job for the day. They walked off hand in hand and got their school supplies. And I kept greeting folks and just affirming their experience and listening. A little bit later, another mom came in and she was sitting at the table. And this time it's three teenagers who walked in, love teenagers. And the two girls just were chatting me up and telling me all about school. Their brother, a little bit younger, a little bit shorter, was quiet next to them, kind of rather stoic. And after they told me about school, I asked him, I said, "How's school going?" And the mom looked up and said, "He hasn't started yet." And I said, "Oh." And then she offered, "He's got developmental delays and I don't know if he's safe." And I said, "I get it. I would want my kid safe in school too." And it was pretty clear to me as an educator that this young man was on the spectrum. And I turned to him and I said, "It's got to be tough when you don't know what kids are doing, if they're messing with you or not, or they really want to be your friend." And he didn't look up at me. He just kind of shook his head, looking at the ground, and he said, "Yes, ma'am." And I turned to the mom and I said, "May I ask you a question?" And she said, "Sure." And I said, "Does he have an individualized educational plan or an IEP?" And she said, "He did." And I said, "Did you know that you can meet with the entire team of teachers during the summer? You can ask that. They're required by law to meet with you if you make that request on your time when you're available. You can meet with them." And she said, I didn't know that." And I said, "How does that information land on you?" And she said, "That's really helpful." And then I turned to her boy, back to her boy, and I said, "Most teachers have a big heart and they're going to help you if you ask um, whether or not a kid's messing with you or really wants to be your friend." And finally, this young man, this boy looks up eyeball to eyeball and he goes, "Thank you, ma'am." And that was like, oh, this is why I'm leaving my judgment at the gate. There are legitimate solutions to be offered when someone else takes the lead in the conversation. And it was really that day, really the beginning of me understanding that I needed to slow down and be ready to learn and be ready to listen rather than speak and ask questions gently. And that's the foundation there of cultural intelligence. So with all the potential for disconnect in a situation like that, I just want to make sure that organizationally we understand whether or not diversity has any value. So the problem, if you just merely make an organization look diverse, you're actually going to lower performance, which is kind of counterintuitive because you hear a lot about the value of diversity. But if you just make people get together because they look different, just because they look different, or you want diversity for diversity's sake in your organization, you're actually going to lower performance. And let me show you what's going on here. I created this chart based on other research that if leaders ignore and suppress cultural differences and they're seen as an obstacle, that if you just diversify your organization, you could potentially increase stonewalling and stereotyping. You might as well keep the organization all the same. when leaders maintain the status quo and you just downplay those differences. But diverse organizations that can talk with one another, who have cultural intelligence, can hear other people's stories and leave judgment just to the side a little bit and acknowledge and support those differences and see them as an asset, that's when you've got performance and productivity skyrocketing in diverse teams. So what in our culture makes it hard to talk with people? It's not just us. What's up with culture? 95%. So Dr. Edward Deming, he's a management consultant who's passed now, and 95% of problems in an organization are caused by the system, not the individual. So if you're not comfortable talking with people, 95% of that is systemic. It's the culture. It's not you. What is it that's tripping us up? Well, cultural intelligence isn't something we have. It's something that we grow. And it's what I love about the term. Cultural intelligence is something I'm forever developing. And I think you'll recognize these stages. Now, these stages, just so you know, they come from the Intercultural Development Inventory. The IDI is a tool that assesses, for example, Jeff and your team's level of cultural intelligence, your ability to talk with people who are different. And when you're talking with somebody, are you completely missing differences? Don't see them? Are you polarizing, judgmental of differences, which is tempting, just for a moment there, sitting near that gate, I was tempted to judge, and we all judge, absolutely. But the kicker is, can we withhold it? And as we move through these stages, we're able to hold our judgment a little bit more lightly. Minimization, we tend to downplay the differences, whereas acceptance is we just allow and appreciate those differences, and then we can adapt our words to show the respect that the person deserves because they're a human being. So just so you know, this is actually a bell curve. 2/3 of the population, not just in the United States, 2/3 of the population around the world are in minimization, are in the mindset of minimization, downplaying differences. And it's so rampant in our culture, in our homes, in our schools, in our offices, in our countries, that I just want you to know more about minimization. And it shows up a little bit differently for dominant and non-dominant group members. So minimization focuses on what we all have in common, which sounds like it's well intended. If I just focus on what we have in common, then everything will be peaceful. But here's the problem. It assumes that everyone's experience is like us. It assumes that Jeff's experience is just like mine. And yet we're two different genders, two different generations, very different people, but we walk around assuming, well, if I can do it, why can't Jeff do it? Which is kind of funny. And then we miss differences when we're in the mindset of minimization, and it pressures people into assimilation, and it makes people feel invisible. And we've all felt invisible. Here's the impact on non-dominant group members. Just so you know, it's still focusing on what we all have in common, but the difference is you see the differences, but you downplay them to go along and get along, to survive. And you feel pressured to assimilate, and you feel invisible. So I'll just give you some examples. So for example, if a parent says to a child who just fell down, "Get up, you're fine," that's minimization. If a person says, "I don't see color," that's minimization. That's a kind of like me saying, "Hey, Jeff, I don't see your manhood." How you identify has a big impact on how you're treated in society. It can sound like if a man says to a woman, "That's not sexism, is it?" Well, it's not his business, right? If she feels it's sexist, then it's sexist, right? Another example is your spouse might say to you, Oh, this too shall pass. Well, we don't know. And then finally, if you had a line supervisor talking to a person working on a factory floor, you can stay until 5 o'clock today, right? We got to get this product out. And she actually needs to leave at 3 o'clock to meet her kindergartner to get off the bus. And she goes, oh, sure. That's minimization. He hasn't actually found out. And the impact ultimately is attrition. People might start being late. They got to still meet their kid on the bus, right? And eventually, if people experience enough minimization, enough not feeling seen and valued, they start to leave. So it's just organizationally, it's something to be aware of. So now that you know better, how can you do better? You're going to use your cultural intelligence. Those last two stages, you accept the person and their uniqueness as valid. When the child falls down, you get to find out, right? You adapt your words and actions to show genuine respect for their experience. So what cultural intelligence sounds like and looks like is, I got 3 tools for you. There's stop, ask, and listen. And if you think about the story that I just told you, it's all there. I was using it, I promise, that day. Here's stop. And stop is actually an acronym. And this is where your power is in stop. Slow down. Take a moment in the middle of the parking lot to wonder, just wonder what's going on, how you can be of benefit in the situation. And particularly if somebody's coming in hot with a conversation, slow it down. In the United States, we're comfortable with about 4 seconds of silence. In China, they're comfortable with about 9 seconds of silence. See if you can stretch that and just slow down. Take 3 deep breaths if somebody's coming in hot. Observe your feelings. You can see your anger or your angst or your awkward. You can feel it. You can feel it down in your gut or in your heart. You can notice that assumption up in your head. And you can also, in a matter of nanoseconds, see how that other person's feeling. And if both of y'all are safe, you can proceed into a conversation with curiosity and wonder. In that fair on the parking lot that day, I was safe, and so were those parents. So I could express curiosity and wonder and honor my own dignity as well as their own, as well as theirs. Excuse me. This is your most powerful tool when you're talking with somebody who's different. Now, particularly, I want you to check that you're safe. So often I end up working with women's groups, like the National Association of Women in Construction, or National Council of Jewish Women. So just, I want to hover over the check that you're safe before you proceed into a conversation. So how do you proceed into a conversation gently? You can ask, would you mind if I ask you a question? And then you can ask, what was your experience, or how'd that feel? And no, I just want you to know that in the United States, those of you who are not American in the room, you probably know that Americans, particularly white Americans, have a reputation of peppering people with questions. And folks will tell me, well, I'm just curious, right? In fact, my French mother-in-law, let's see, I'm 58 years old, so probably 30 some odd years ago, when I was asking her questions about France, she stopped me after a while and she said, that can come across as intrusive. And it never occurred to me that when I'm satisfying my own curiosity, I'm actually kind of intruding on the other person's experience. So rather than just assuming you can ask when you're part of the dominant culture in any organization, just ask. You mind if I ask you a question? What was your experience, or how'd that feel? And then listen up. And what you're doing with cultural intelligence is listening to understand their experience. You're not doing what my 85-year-old uncle does, listening to be right, listening to speak, or not really listening. These 2, 3, and 4, this is what most of us are doing. Listening to understand. Dang, if it doesn't take some discipline to slow down and take a breath and try to wrap your mind around their experience. And of course, I want you to hear them out. I'm going to offer you a bonus tool, and that's check your impact. You want to find out how it landed on a person, or what was the impact of your words. I want to hover over this for just 1 minute. The reason is sometimes we have the best of intentions, and honestly, our intent does not matter in a cross-cultural conversation. It's really how it lands is what's important. In fact, even with my spouse, a couple of times today, I'll check my impact and I'll say, okay, honey, how'd that land on you? Or what did you hear? There's different ways to say it. And you don't want to say, did I say the wrong thing? Because that plants a seed for negativity. And we don't need to assume that we've done the wrong thing. All we have to do is say, how'd that land on you? And they'll let you know. And honestly, about 85% of the time, my husband will say, that's cool. And then I'll say, well, what'd you hear? And sometimes it's completely different from what I thought I said. Just really interesting. But this check your impact thing is probably beyond stop, is probably your most significant tool when you're working cross-culturally. So here's the teacher in me. We gotta check my impact with you all. What, so what, now what? And you can use this tool to check in your meetings. I use it with my clients. So what are the tools that you've got now? There were 4 of them, 3 plus a bonus, right? And so what does it feel like having a few tools? And now what can you imagine doing with these tools? I'm going to circle back to the questions in just a minute. You know what's coming. So how does this fit in the big picture? What I do, what you're seeing here today and participating in this webinar is a bit of an echo of my very first workshop, Creating a Case for Diversity. And I've got 5 workshops to really get people in an organization up and talking. This is 5, can be 60 or 90-minute workshops. And you can see right here down the middle, the workshops come in. Right before we do the workshops and get people up and talking, I have folks take the IDI so that they know exactly where they fall on that continuum. There's no point in me telling you your organization is in polarization or minimization or acceptance. Let's just get the data. In dominant US culture, we love empirical data. Let's get the data and find out exactly where you are. Then we can customize the training. And if you'd like to, you can take the IDI. Here's a discounted link. I'm happy to send that link to you. And what can you do today? You can help me spread the love. Connect with me on LinkedIn and share a takeaway. You can take the IDI, invite me to your organization like Jeff has to do a workshop or a keynote. This is a workshop more than it is a keynote. All right, so in the chat box, what tools do you have now? This is kind of just spitting it back. What tools do you have now? We could even test Jeff. What tools?
I put my answer in. I think the one that resonated most with me was the STOP acronym, kind of reminding me to pause. And I know for myself, sometimes when I find myself in potentially heated situations, that my emotions can get the better of me. So I think taking those breaths could do quite a bit.
Oh my gosh, it's a matter of nanoseconds and the difference it can make. And Swati says, stop, ask, and listen. And Julia said, how did that land with you? So she's got check your impact going. That's awesome. And so what does it feel like having a few tools? Just what's it feel like? Possibility? What do you mean by possibility? That's a cool word. I've never gotten that word before.
Like an opportunity to work towards the world that I want to see, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. You can envision when people shift from knowing to learning, you can envision it. Stephanie says, hope. There's hope. There really is. Swati says, working towards more awareness and mindful of others' experience. That sounds like a very Indian response. That's beautiful. I did a similar workshop a couple of weeks ago for an Indian-based HR organization, and I get deep answers like that. Julie says, honestly, I want to have cue cards for those tense situations. Oh, damn, you're so right. And I'll tell you, Julia, your cue will be the other person. If you apply stop, the other person will let you know whether or not and how to proceed. You actually can take a breath. It's really empowering stuff when people let you know what they need. Thank you, Julia, for your honesty and your forthrightness. What can you imagine doing with these tools? Not giving up? Okay, what does that mean, Jeff? Not giving up.
Again, you know, I think sometimes when I've found myself in potentially heated conversation, I think sometimes it's the fight or flight thing. I lean more towards flight, and you know, as you recall in the beginning, you know, my concern is always that I might offend someone or embarrass myself, and I think sometimes if you just don't engage, you don't run the risk of doing that.
Right. And if you engage, if you don't engage, you could potentially miss an opportunity. And if you don't engage it and somebody has made a racist or a sexist or a xenophobic remark, it means you agree. And so
Mm-hmm.
do you drop into silence or do you go with violence? And what these tools, the tools that I'm offering, suggest that there's actually a third way. And I actually have on my website a blog called The Third Way. And this is it. It doesn't mean you agree with a person when you say, what was your experience? That's got to be tough. And you drop into listening mode. Now, one of the things that a lot of people don't know is the person who's asking the question is the person who's in charge of the conversation, not the person who's answering. And so when you slow it down, like Julia is saying here, slowing down these conversations, you're opening up space between you and the other person, and both hearts can slow down. You can relax and you can hear one another's context and validate it. Doesn't mean you agree with it. I didn't agree with those moms not having their kids in school the first day, but I could certainly appreciate why they weren't there. And because I heard them out, then we can start developing some pathways to solving the damn problem, right? Nobody has to be blamed. Claudia says, as with any tools, you have to use them appropriately, not leave them in a drawer. Oh, that's beautiful. And choose the right one in the situation. Tools provide opportunities. Damn, she's deep. That's awesome. Yeah. And what's really cool about stop is there's hardly ever a time that it doesn't apply. It works. I got 4 kids that go from 21 to 31, and I'm using stop daily, right? So we have just 10 minutes left and we can do Q&A here, but I want you to know that whether or not we get your questions answered or you have a question tonight or tomorrow morning, I'm an email away. I'm totally. And I also write this blog that answers kind of questions, how-to questions. And I just double down and I think about my clients and their situations, and stories bubble up, and it's really fun writing these blogs with how-tos in them. So what
And
questions do you have?
Dr. Amy, let me just address a couple points from the chat here. We've had some folks, you know, wanting to go back and look at the series of workshops that you offer. People, you know, you shared some really valuable stuff. So I want to make sure that everybody knows we are going to share a recording of this workshop with all of you who've signed up. So you definitely have the chance to go back and review it again. But, you know, Dr. Amy, as it relates to empowering partners, your website, I'm guessing there are a lot of places that people could connect with you online to sort of see more about some of these things that we've talked about today, as you've said.
Yeah. Yeah, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. It's actually the only social I'm on because I am an entrepreneur and only have so much bandwidth. am on LinkedIn several times a week and posting examples and articles about saving the planet using cultural intelligence and caring for one another using cultural intelligence. So join me on LinkedIn and you can check out what I'm up to on my website. Oh, Jeff, the very coolest thing is I've been working for 3 years to develop an online self-study program that is a self-study version of this workshop series. And it's launching next week. And I wanted to tell
Congratulations.
you all that. Thank you. A number of people really helped me get it articulated because I'm used to this kind of teaching where there's back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
So this educator had to get it out and put it into a platform where there was one-way communication. But it trains you in each workshop. I make sure that you've got more tools for your toolbox, talking with people who are different. And to Claudia's point, then you got to not put it in a drawer.
Well, I'll make sure in our follow-up email to everybody that we mentioned that, Dr. Amy. I'll connect with you offline to make sure we can send people that way. So, we do have a few minutes left here for questions from our guests here, and so I'll ask people to go ahead, take this time. If you jotted down questions as we've been going along, please feel free to put them in the chat or even in the Q&A. And while we wait for those, Dr. Amy, I hopefully I can break the ice with a couple of my own. One thing I wanted to ask you was, you made a point during, I think it was during sort of the overview of STOP, about making sure that you're safe before moving forward. And maybe I missed it, but I'm not really, I kind of wonder, how do you know? What does safety mean in that situation? I
Oh,
take it you don't just mean like physically safe, but more of an emotionally safe place. How do you know if you're in a safe place to engage in a deeper conversation with somebody?
and that's a beautiful question. And to your point, it's not always physical safety, although sometimes it is physically safe,
Mm-hmm.
physical
Sure.
safety. I want you to be physically safe first. And how do you know if you're not safe? Your gut knows so
Mm-hmm.
often before your head that you're not psychologically or physically safe, and you need to get out of that situation. You need to bow out. And safety can be, the situation is overwhelming for you. You're not feeling like you want to slow down and connect with this person, and you don't necessarily have a reason. That's okay. Listen to your gut and bow out of the situation. You don't need to be comfortable, but you do need to be safe. And I say that with lots of compassion, because as an educator, brains don't learn unless they're uncomfortable. We have to go through awkward to get to awesome. We have to go through uncomfortable to be comfortable in a new situation with a new person. That's going to happen. But your gut and your heart and your brain together know the difference between safety and uncomfortable. If you're safe, you don't continue. That
Another thing that's been in my
Oh, can I
mind.
just say,
Oh yeah, go
cultural
ahead.
cultural intelligence starts with compassion for yourself.
Mm.
And so if you're not getting out of the situation and just being loving to another person, that's not cultural intelligence. Cultural intelligence is about both of you feeling safe and opening up the space between you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Let me ask you another question, and this gets back to a comment that was made earlier in the chat by, I think, Helen. Helen was saying that she often reminds folks that your curiosity is not someone else's responsibility. And I think a lot of us white men have been in situations where when we are asking questions of people, sometimes we're putting, folks in an uncomfortable place. How do you sort of combat that? Does that make sense?
Um, One more time.
Yeah, I mean, the idea that in asking probing questions about somebody's experience or identity, we're in a way, I'm always worried about making that person feel like it's their job to teach me something that I don't
Yeah,
already
yeah,
know.
right.
I've had that experience and I mean it with a good outcome, right? I think an understanding and appreciating somebody for helping me develop as a person. But how do you make sure that you're not putting responsibility on somebody else by being curious?
Oh, that's a great question. So I told you I'm married to a foreign-born national, and he came to the United States to go to university here and developed an American accent. So he looks like an American white guy. He doesn't know anything about popular culture here or about American football. It's confusing to him that a foot never touches a ball and it's called football. Uh, and so whenever he finds another foreign-born national or foreigner, he'll just glom right onto them, and he'd come in hot with his question, "Where are you from?" And he noticed that sometimes people would recoil from him. And he finally, I just a couple of years ago actually asked me, what do I say? You know, if I really want to get to know this person and I want to have a relationship with them. And I said to my husband, well, that's the first step, is recognizing that they're not just an object of curiosity, but you want a relationship. So good on you for wanting to have a relationship with them. And he said, okay, so my intention's good. What do I say? And I said, share a little bit about you. Just one sentence, because then it makes you a little bit vulnerable and shows I'm willing to share me. And I'd love to know something about you. And he said, what could I say? And I said, how about, I wasn't raised in the US and my accent can be deceiving. And I would love to know, I was raised in Rotterdam and in Rio and Bangkok. And I'd really love to know where you're from. And he's discovered, Jeff, that if he just shares a little something about himself, people will be genuine back and say, I don't really have time for this conversation now, but most of the time people want to connect back with him. How does that land on you, my answer?
It's great advice, actually, and I'm thinking specifically about this one situation that I was in where I could see where that would have made a big difference if I'd started out by sharing instead of asking.
Yeah, yeah.
Great.
Just showing that curiosity that you have. Because
Yeah.
clearly, Jeff, you're a learner. Otherwise, you wouldn't be in the role that you're in.
Yeah, I
And
think so. Yeah.
yeah,
Thanks for
you're
saying that.
extraordinary. Helen's
Well,
asking a really good question about what's wrong with finding what you have in common with people. And it's interpreted as minimizing differences.
hmm,
Actually, finding out what you have in common, genuinely in common with people, is totally legit. And Helen, you actually want to find out what you have in common. The problem with a whole bunch of people walking around on this planet in minimization is you're making assumptions about what you have in common
hmm.
instead of finding out. And so, just me in that situation, I could just assume, we're both moms and I'm going to have something in common. Instead, if I take on this posture of learner and listener rather than speaker and knower, I'm going to find out what we genuinely have in common, and genuinely is different. And it's that deeper understanding is what we're missing in a society of minimization that's rampant. Helen, how does that land on you? Does that answer you the question between minimization and acceptance and adaptation?
We'll give Helen a second to respond to that, to talk about how it landed on her. But while we do that, Dr. Amy, we're right up against our hour here. Would you go ahead and put your slide up again with ways people can contact you,
Absolutely.
blog and your email address? And let me simply say, you've certainly given me a lot to think about today. And I think some of those tools that you shared are things that are going to stay with me as, even at BU, we're trying to do the work of raising everybody's level of cultural intelligence and creating the vision for the community that we want to see. So thank you. And on behalf of, we've got folks even in the chat just sharing their thanks. So you've made an awesome contribution to the BU community today. So I really thank you for that.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you for inviting me. BU is extraordinary in doing this work. Well done, y'all. Thank you.
And I also want to thank all of you for joining for this important conversation. I specifically want to thank those of you that have supported the university with your donations. We couldn't do this kind of work that we do without you, so thank you for that. I want to ask everybody to please keep an eye on our alumni events calendar for webinars that we'll be announcing in the future starting in 2024. Also, make sure that you take a look at our monthly alumni career newsletter, The Edge, for news about additional resources. And in the meantime, as we talked about before, make sure that you're using BU Connects to bridge some of those gaps and build your professional network. And thank you again, Dr. Amy. Thank you, everybody, for your time. Hope you all have a great day. or a great evening wherever in the world you might be. Thanks, Amy.
Thank you.